Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Great to be back. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. And today is a subject that I honestly don't want to talk about, but it's all over the place. Ravi Zacharias. We talked about him on a previous podcast, but obviously a lot of new stuff has come to light, and I want to talk about just from a different angle, and I think it's important for you listeners, I think, to hear from people who... I reported my own dad, right. Your ex-husband,
right.
The father
of all my children.
Father of your 11 children.
Father of my children.
And we didn't hesitate to do that. We've talked about that a lot on this podcast. We, honest to God, never saw any other option but to report him. Never did we deliberate. Never did we question whether the allegations might be true, and we had no idea he was an abuser. We literally had no idea. We had never heard of any allegation ever until my sister disclosed to both of us about a day apart. We had never heard a single allegation or seen anything that was cause for alarm that would make us think he was an abuser. So, it's not like this just was some random guy or that, my dad creeped us out. And, it wasn't any of that. I mean, we had the deepest respect for him. And so, from our perspective, there's no excuse for what the RZIM board did to cover up all of these allegations, to do what they did to Lori Ann and Brad Thompson, who, I'm friends with Lori. Lori Ann is a sweetheart. And what they did to destroy her is inexcusable. So
it really is, Jimmy. And as you're talking, some people may not get the whole of it, of what you're saying. There really was no hesitation to do what was right.
Not at all. We never, ever didn't hesitate to report. And it was awful.
And when
that whole process of reporting was excruciating.
It was not fun. It was painful. It was heartbreaking. It was everything you could think of. But you know what I've often thought about? To try to conceal, hide, or deny would have been worse.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It would have been way worse. Way worse for us, for our family, for all the rest of the kids. It would have been way worse. So I beg to question, why do people go that route?
Yeah.
Why?
I know.
Why go to all this trouble, like we're going to talk about here today, to deny, to conceal, to hide, to lie, to cover up? Why?
Yeah. And why protect anyone to that extent? Right. I mean, part of me can understand denial. I mean, we certainly had a degree of denial, but that didn't matter. Like our denial doesn't erase the facts.
Doesn't stop you
when there's a
doing,
credible allegation of abuse.
Right.
You override your denial, and you report it. You turn those facts over to the police where they belong,
so
and
that
you report
they can investigate and find the truth. Right.
So, there's another angle to this too, and it's one that it just gets under my skin. So I'm agitable today.
I picked up on that when I talked to you earlier. I could tell this is bugging you.
Well, it is.
And rightly so.
Okay, so we had talked about this before, but But I'm going to bring it back up because when Zacharias died, Vice President Pence spoke at his funeral. He was all somber and, just talking about what a great, Ravi Zacharias was the best apologist in anybody's lifetime, in the history of mankind, basically, is what Mike Pence was saying, Vice President Pence. Tim Tebow gave a talk, and he was crying and talking about what great friends they were and what a great man, and on and on and on. And all these people were being paraded in front of Zacharias at his funeral, talking about how superior he was as a Christian and just so great, so marvelous, so wonderful.
Oh, how many people he helped. How
he changed the world. Yeah.
Was spread far and wide.
So I had posted in a private group, and I just said, I don't want to go into detail about this group because, there's an agreement that you're not allowed to talk about stuff within that group, and I respect that. I respect people's privacy, but generally, I'll say that I put a post when Zacharias died, just lamenting that Ravi Zacharias had victims who were watching all these people sobbing over this man and talking about him like he was a god. And that was really traumatizing for the victims. And I said, I know Lori Ann Thompson personally, and this is a tough day for her. So please keep that in mind when you're tempted to post what a wonderful, marvelous man Ravi Zacharias was. So I put that post up, and I got absolutely just
shredded.
Yeah, I was going to use a stronger term, but I have to be careful what I say. People were incredibly rude. They were, and these were friends of mine, and they were saying, wasn't she the one who, her and her husband sued some other company, and isn't she some ambulance chaser? And they were talking trash about Lori Ann Thompson. Other people were saying things like, well, Jimmy, you're not without sin. All of us are tempted to do things, and even if this is true, to say that he has victims and that that he's a fraud, that's just a really cruel and insensitive thing to say, and that's just not truthful, and you should apologize. Things like that. Yeah. And I looked back. I did a search for my post in that group, and that post is gone. It was deleted by the administrators. What I find curious, and whatever, that's expected. I mean, that's routine for advocates. We know that that's how people respond. Unfortunately, that is just how people respond to allegations of abuse. It is
unfortunate, Jimmy. It's as you and I were talking prior to this podcast, it's easier to jump on the bandwagon and join in the hip hip hurrah than it is to stand apart and say, well, wait a minute, this isn't all
right. Why don't we look at the information of these credible allegations? But people don't want to do that. It's you're being cruel. He's dead. Why are you bringing this up now?
That's a big
I was hearing all this stuff. If you stand with the victims, you don't trash victims and call them ambulance chasers and defend the honor of this wonderful man, and then turn around and in another breath say you're all for victims. It doesn't work that way. And I have little patience for people who claim that they stand by victims when they don't. You can't, from the safety of your own keyboard, put a post and talk about how wonderful victims are and how you stand beside them when you don't. If you haven't stood beside victims throughout this entire process, don't feed a line that you stand for victims.
That's one of the cries, Jimmy, that I hear most often from victims saying that they have stood alone so much of the time. And there's almost a joining in at the time of convenience, when it's convenient.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
to join in and say, I am with you,
Mm-hmm.
then at the time of when the excruciating pain and when the gossip and gossip
Mm-hmm.
swirls around all this uh, talk, and it's hard to pick truth from fiction, and people get
Mm-hmm.
adding their part too, and the person that's telling their story often gets picked apart to the point where they almost wish they hadn't said anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think Lori Ann
yeah.
Thompson, she read a statement the other day that was so powerful, and it was very emotional, and she talked about the toll that just telling her husband, the toll that took
Right.
on their marriage, on her
Absolutely.
health, on their
Absolutely.
careers, and then that was just the beginning of it. Little did she know, she
Right.
thought, whenever she was bringing this to the board at RZIM, I think at the time she thought maybe there were compassionate people on that board. Well, she found out that they ruthlessly attacked her, and defended Ravi Zacharias. So I want to read some of the statement that the board put out the other day. And this is another thing too. The RZIM board put a statement out, and I'm going to read just a couple short paragraphs from it. But that's what I'm seeing too, is people are posting it and saying how wonderful that they've repented, and they put this statement out saying that they made a mistake. Well, here's the problem I have with that. It's too little too late, first of all. And secondly, not a single person's name is named on
Right.
this. It's just kind of
Yeah.
generally
It's a
the board.
generic, yeah.
Nobody knows who these faceless,
I
nameless
find that
people
quite
are.
interesting.
If they're
Yes.
really repentant, they would put their own picture out there. They would put themselves out there. They would record a video. They'd put their face out there and say, Lori Ann and Brad and all these other victims, all of you victims who we don't even know about. We really, 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 really destroyed you, and we will do whatever it takes. We will take whatever consequence is coming our way. We will right the wrongs that we did. But they didn't do that in the statement.
No.
The statement was, I'll read a little bit of it. It starts out, it says, again, this is the RZIM board. They put out this joint statement. It is with shattered hearts that we issue this statement about the allegations against RZIM's founder, Ravi Zacharias. Following allegations made in late August of 2020 that Ravi had engaged in sexual misconduct and abuse in connection with 2 day spas, we commissioned Miller and Martin, PLLC, a law firm with experience in corporate and sex crimes investigations, to conduct an independent investigation. We gave Miller and Martin broad scope to pursue any avenues that they judged to be relevant to the accusations, and we emphasized that our only purpose for the investigation was to ascertain the full truth. Having received the results of the investigation, we are publicly releasing the investigation report in the exact form that we received it. We've been waiting to make an extended statement in the hope that the full findings of the investigation would allow us to speak more accurately and meaningfully. We also wanted to ensure Miller and Martin's independence in their investigation assessments. So I agree with that. I think they did the right thing there. Absolutely. They said, to be victimized by unwanted sexual contact, advances, and behavior is horrendous. It is diametrically opposed to everything we believe about the value and dignity of every single person. This is where I start to take issue with this. Because why is this their stance now? Why was this not the board's stance in 2017 when Julianne Smith wrote in great detail, also producing emails between Lori Ann
Right.
Thompson and Ravi Zacharias? Julianne Smith, who is a personal friend of mine, was viciously attacked.
Yes.
Viciously
And
attacked when
Ravi,
she published
on
that
the other
story.
hand, kept everything totally concealed tight.
Through an
Nobody-
NDA.
Oh,
He
yeah.
sued Lori Ann Thompson,
Yes.
Lori Ann and Brad.
Yes. So right there, like you and I were discussing, that's a red flag if ever I saw one.
Right.
Is if there was
Yeah,
nothing
the guy
there,
was a jerk.
open up your phone, open up your emails, open up your
Right.
computer, and go for it, people. That wasn't what happened. And the board stood by him 1,000% on that.
And there, I mean, so
1,000%.
this is so different too from what we experienced, because what we heard,
Right.
and I talk about not in great detail, but I just mentioned the email that I received from my sister. There wasn't a lot of detail in that email. I mean, there were no specific details. There was nothing about penetration. There were no very specific details that chronicled abuse. It just
Right.
it was a general.
Yes.
Do you remember that one night something happened? I mean, it literally was that vague.
Yeah. Well,
And we still reported based on that.
We did.
Here, Julianne Smith, and not just Julianne Smith, but Steve Bauman. He's the friendly banjo atheist. Steve wrote a book about Ravi Zacharias. Steve has been speaking out about Ravi Zacharias being a fraud for years, with the fake credentials, the sex abuse scandals. Steve has also produced plenty of evidence. Steve is an attorney, so he does his homework. He's really careful not to publish anything that's hearsay. I mean, Steve really, really, really genuinely
weird,
has
Jimmy,
done his homework.
As I said previously, to think of the thousands of people that were touched by Ravi in an abusive way, whose lives were touched, and that whole that information was out there, yet it was not believed. That's how rock solid he had his facade built.
Yeah.
I guess if you want to call it that, to where people wept over him. He was that precious to them. They wept over him. They put their own integrity on the line for him. I'm sure there are some people who sincerely regret now that they didn't believe the truth, but they put their own integrity and morals on the line for Ravi because he was the man.
But here's the question: for what?
Right.
I mean, that's what I don't understand. When you have evidence in front of you, I mean, even if you think that Julianne Smith is just she's just some woman who's behind the keyboard who's looking for an axe to grind, even if you think that about Julianne Smith, and that's not who Julianne Smith is.
Not at all.
No, she's
Right.
She also does her homework really well. But even if you think that about her, wouldn't you at least sit down and look at the evidence that she presented and be like, wow, these are actual verified emails between Ravi Zacharias and Lori Ann Thompson where he's threatening her, and he's just being an absolute total jerk.
He was an abusive jerk.
Wouldn't you at least look at that and consider that?
People get swept into stuff and they don't realize it. I've been watching, and call it ridiculous or not, but I've been watching old videos of Elvis.
That is ridiculous. I'm just going to throw it out there.
I love it. Love his singing.
I saw a meme the other day with a fat Elvis, and I almost sent it to you. Now I regret that I didn't.
You should have. But listen to what I'm saying here. Your sister had a roommate in college who was a worshiper of Elvis. And when I met her on the day I moved your sister into the dorm, this girl was sitting clothed like Elvis, and she was weeping over him. Weeping. And this is years later after his death. And as I'm watching his videos and seeing he would wipe his sweaty forehead and neck, and that's pretty disgusting, and then hand tissues sometimes or scarves to girls, and they would just grab them and hold this sweaty yuck. They worshipped him. And
Yeah.
people get caught up into that, and you best not say anything about Elvis to that kind of person.
Right.
Elvis was not a really great guy.
No, he wasn't.
His
No,
attitude comes
not at
out
all.
over and over. He was cocky and snotty to his
Mm-hmm.
audience. He had an attitude. Plus, he didn't
And he
have.
was a misogynist too.
Yes, and it comes out.
Yeah.
But he was worshipped, and to this day, this many years after his death, there are still worshipers of him. So Ravi had that kind of following.
And he still does.
And he still does. There are going to be people get very angry to hear this speaking out on him. You know, very angry.
Well,
proof or no proof.
That's right. So now
Right.
the thing is,
Proof
well,
or no proof.
again, he's dead. Why would you bring this up
Right.
now? What's the point of this
Why
investigation?
mar his
yeah.
reputation now? Those, after all, didn't those people have an opportunity to speak up when he was alive? I mean, I could almost hear all of it.
Yeah, no, they didn't because the
No.
board intimidated them.
They were
and
shut
that,
down.
You know,
They
that
were
was
closed
another
out.
one.
Yeah.
Julie Royce wrote a really good piece yesterday. Well, it's the 16th today we're recording. She wrote it on February 15th on her blog, The Roy's Report. And the title of it is Opinion Spokesperson's Letter Reveals RZIM's Spiritually Abusive Leadership and Consequences of Protecting Ravi and Brand. And it's a 26-page letter written by Ruth Malhotra. She was the PR manager for Ravi Zacharias for the International Missions Ministries, the RZIM. And she wrote this letter talking about how the board was so abusive, and she tried to raise alarm about Ravi Zacharias and saying that, like, look, we have credible allegations here, and this guy is verbally abusive. He's very secretive. He's not a nice guy, and she was absolutely annihilated by the board. So that's, again, things like this is why I have a problem with this letter that the board put out, because all of a sudden now they're just so compassionate, and you know, they want to pretend like for the last several years that the board wasn't abusive themselves, because they were, and they need to acknowledge that, and that's what they need to acknowledge. But you know, I'll read just a couple more sentences from this statement the board put out. Let's see. Tragically, witnesses describe encounters including sexting, unwanted touching, spiritual abuse, and rape. We are devastated by what the investigation has shown and are filled with sorrow for the women who were hurt by this terrible abuse. Again, why was that not your response when for years people like Steve Bauman and Julianne Smith, there were others, Dee Parsons, there were people writing about this and warning the board and saying, look, you guys need to look into this. And they were ignored, or they were treated with cruelty by the board. But now they're devastated. I don't get it. I don't get it.
Sitting here, well, I kind of do also. You're talking big money here also, Jimmy. You're not talking a little, group of 3 people, and one says there was abuse and one says there wasn't. You're talking millions of people, millions of dollars at stake. Big names always include
tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars.
Big names always include big money, payoffs, lots of things like that, and we know that corruption within runs rampant. And I will stand by my word of always saying, when you have a solid board like that, or whether it's and I'll probably get slashed for this, group of elders or whatever at a church who will not recognize abuse, I think there is a fear of some of that light being shed on some of them and their background being brought forward. And it's much easier to shut down the gossip and shut down the talk and keep it quiet and leave things as they are
Yeah.
than to start digging. Because when people get digging, heaven knows what they'll find.
Right.
And people know this.
Yeah.
So
And I think too, I think this is a point worth making too. We hear this term thrown around a lot, mistakes,
right.
spiritual misjudgments, things like that. People need to have the discernment to know the difference, because people do make mistakes. All of us make stupid mistakes.
We do. Yeah.
We
I
make
think back
misjudgments. We
all
make
the time in my own
miscalculations. We
life,
say
and
things and do
yeah.
things that
Right.
that not only are hurtful to us, but they're hurtful to other people. That's not what this is. When there's a patterned, serial behavior of abuse and behavior that does not stop, that by definition is abuse. Ravi Zacharias was relentless. This investigation uncovered too that even in the middle of this lawsuit with Lori Ann and Brad Thompson, even in the middle of that, when he was outed by Lori Ann, he continued his abuse at these massage parlors.
Oh, yeah.
He continued sending graphic material and receiving graphic material on his phone. He didn't stop. So that's my point. Like, there's a radical difference, and we need to know the difference between making really stupid misjudgments and having this serial predatory behavior. And Ravi Zacharias fits every definition of an abuser. And people had been
Absolutely.
writing about
Right.
the fake credentials.
Right.
Steve Bauman
right.
did
Yeah.
a tremendous job researching and uncovering all these fake degrees
That's
that
not a
Ravi
mistake.
Zacharias.
That's
right.
intentional.
In
It's-
every book,
in every
in every
aspect,
speech,
it's
he would talk
intentional.
about his
Yeah.
degrees that
And-
did
and
not exist.
That's not an error. That wasn't a mistake.
Right.
That there's a huge difference what you're saying. A mistake in misjudgment or misaction or whatever, we all make those. We
Right.
do. And interestingly, I think most of us know when we do it, at least at the moment, or maybe when I look back on my life, I keep thinking, wow, I was a mess of a person. I said things I didn't mean, they came out wrong, and I was just wasn't what I wanted to be. I recognize that. But the intention wasn't there to hurt, to harm, to
Yeah,
lie,
and-
to steal somebody's life. So to
And when
speak.
there's that self-discovery, you stop.
you change your behavior.
You apologize, you
yes.
stop, you change your
Ugh.
behavior.
Yes, you don't.
There's such
do
a
that
radical
again.
difference between
Yes.
that and intentionally and
Yes.
willfully pursuing
And-
people for the purpose of
Right.
exploiting them and
Right,
victimizing them.
right.
There's such a radical
Absolutely.
difference.
Absolutely.
And I feel like people, that's such a basic thing that we don't even need to be taught. Like, we should just know the difference. We should just instinctively know the difference between predatory behavior and making mistakes.
If you
and
watch
people
little
don't.
kids
They
play, it's so cool. If one will smack a kid, when they're little toddlers or whatever, and the other one, wah, wah, what's the response of the other? I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
sorry,
right.
I'm sorry. And it's right away. And
Or if
they
you're one of my
hug.
sons, he has an instant, like, he starts crying.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to get in trouble. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I don't know what I was thinking. I just got mad.
absolutely.
And like
And-
instant confession.
Yes, it is. And there's a change in the behavior.
Absolutely.
There is. And it's sincere.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we do things. We don't know why we did them or why we said what we did. Or that's different than that being a repetitive cycle of abuse, of just harming someone.
Well, it reminds me of the episode that we did on calling abusers hunters.
Yes.
There's such a difference between somebody who, I don't know, we'll say that somebody intentionally swerves to hit an animal driving down the road just because they have a lapse of judgment or whatever, there's a difference between that and somebody who stalks and hunts animals for sport.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like the two are really radically different. And I feel like people they don't even know that basic concept. If you're a church leader and you don't know the basic difference between messing up, making a mistake, and being a predator who searches for prey with the intent to exploit them and harm them, if you don't even know that difference in your church leader, like, you should probably step down.
Absolutely.
You should probably step down and say, I'm really not equipped.
Absolutely.
I'm really not equipped for leadership because I can't tell the difference between making a mistake and preying on somebody and oppressing them. I don't know the difference, so I'm either going to get educated or I'm just going to step down. Have the humility to do that because people are getting harmed.
Absolutely.
This nearly destroyed the Thompsons when this whole scam. I mean, this has been ongoing since 2017, and it nearly destroyed them, literally. But it's not just them; it's all the other victims, and there are many victims that Ravi Zacharias had.
And back to what you said previously about people all but worshiping Ravi, and that's what it amounts to when we idolize people, when we find no wrong in them at all. I mean, come on, we're all human, all of us, and I don't think anybody except God our Father should be on that level of what we do with people sometimes. But those people who now have changed gears, is often because it's popular. I'll do what's popular. It's popular now to say Ravi, shame on him, and what a wonderful board now. They recognize this, and to totally override the facts once again. That's not how this played out.
Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate, and I think there's a lesson to be learned in this, though, and that, I hope if people are listening to this is not just a venting session. Like, we really want people to get it. I would say if you were one of the people who radically defended Ravi Zacharias and you have not actually sat with victims of abuse, if you've never sat with victims of abuse, please refrain from posting online and talking about how disappointed you are to learn this and that you stand with victims. Don't even write it. Please don't type those words out. If you have not actually sat with victims, if you've been a staunch defender of Ravi Zacharias this whole time, please don't say how much you stand for victims.
It just hurts even more.
Yeah,
it does.
And we can see through it.
It hurts.
We can really see through.
It hurts more. It does.
And then I would say too, we'll close with this truth bomb. If facts are presented to you and there are credible allegations of abuse, for heaven's sakes, look into it and don't start excusing away the abuse or making excuses for the person who's the subject of the allegations. Just look at the facts and report. If it's a reportable incident, report it. If it's something that needs investigated, investigate. Hire somebody and investigate. Please, please, please. We've got to turn this culture around. That's our message to you. We thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.